This is Standing Watch. And now, Evangelist Norbert Link.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to our Standing Watch program. My friends, do you realize how your religious liberty and freedom is being taken away from you in the United States of America? And this is continuing. We have seen this trend for quite a while, but not to the extent as we are seeing it now. Now, the most recent example, of course, was the situation with a Kentucky clerk, Mrs. Davis, who refused to grant marriage licenses, to same-sex couples. And as a consequence, ultimately, a maverick judge held her under contempt and put her in jail. Now, she's out of jail now, but she is supposed to start working again next week, and if she continues to grant those licenses, as she undoubtedly will, based on her religious conviction, she's probably going to end up in jail again. And so you might say, yeah, but this is really something which is of no interest to me because this is just her, and she is an employee of the government, and she has given an oath, as some even Republican candidates have said, and because she gave the oath, she is subject to the law of the land. And so therefore she had to give those and grant those licenses. Now, people who say that don't understand anything about the law. And I'm telling you right now, I'm not only an ordained minister, but I'm also an attorney licensed to practice in the great state of California. See, under the law, you have a constitutional right of religious liberty and freedom. You see, it all goes back, of course, to this constitutional decision of the United States Supreme Court saying that now same-sex partners have a constitutional right to get married. Now, of course, in making this decision, it was clearly a political decision. It had nothing to do with the Constitution, and even the dissenting judges have said that. Frankly, this decision is unconstitutional because, you see, the United States Supreme Court has no right to make law. They only have the right to interpret the law, to interpret the Constitution, and there can be no doubt about the fact that the Constitution does not give a constitutional right to anybody else but a man and a woman to marry. All the other fanciful interpretations are not in accordance with the Constitution. So in a sense, that law is actually unconstitutional. But you see, the point is there's also a constitutional right of a person like Mrs. Davis to refuse to grant those licenses if her religious conviction prevents it. And that was totally overlooked in this case. Unfortunately, that is also being overlooked in many other situations, as I will tell you in a moment. But first, let me read to you an article from Breitbart referring to Mike Huckabee, former governor, and also, of course, I believe a minister of the same church which Mrs. Davis belongs to. And so he said that Lincoln ignored the 1857 Dred Scott decision that said black people were not fully human. It was a wrong decision. And to say that we have to surrender to judicial supremacy is to do what Jefferson warned against, which is in essence to surrender to judicial tyranny. He went on to say, you've got Democrats who ignored the law when it was a law to have traditional marriage. Gavin Newsom in San Francisco, as mayor, performed same-sex weddings even though it was illegal. Did he ever get put in jail? He most certainly did not. You have Barack Obama and Eric Holder when he was Attorney General. They ignored the rulings of the Defense of Marriage Act. Did they ever get put in jail for ignoring the law? They most certainly did not. So when is it that liberals get to choose what laws they support? But a county clerk in Kentucky who, acting on her Christian faith, is criminalized, jailed without bail because she acted on her conscience and according to the only law that is in front of her. These are good questions. Let me also just say that when she gave that oath to be subject to the law, that law granting same-sex couples a constitutional right to marry didn't exist. It didn't exist. It was made by the Supreme Court, which it doesn't have any right to do. That is only the prerogative of Congress to do that, to make laws. But in any event, it doesn't stop with Mrs. Davis. Here's an article by ABC News, dated September 5, saying that Oregon's Marion County Judge Vance Day is being investigated by a judicial fitness commission, in part over his refusal to perform same-sex marriages on religious grounds. Last month, the Ohio Supreme Court's Board of Professional Conduct said judges cannot refuse to marry same-sex couples on personal, moral, or religious grounds. Judges who stop performing all marriages to avoid marrying same-sex couples may be interpreted as biased and could be disqualified from any case where sexual orientation is an issue, the Ohio Board ruled. But you see, this is the attack on religious liberties and freedoms on those who uphold what the Bible clearly states. But do we see the same kind of quote-unquote prosecution against the tiny minority in this country which is trying to impose their will on the vast silent majority? We found this article, which was dated September 7 on the internet. An openly gay Texas judge says she refuses to conduct marriage ceremonies for straight couples. No one tried to put her in jail. No federal judge tried to condemn her. That's the Dallas County Judge Tonya Parker. Her refusal to marry people based on the fact that they were not homosexuals wasn't backed by any faith-based belief or anything other than a personal vendetta, this article says. So why isn't this a big deal? Well, most people that go to her and get turned down go somewhere else. And so then they ask the pointed question, so why was Kim Davis jailed and not the judge? Rather. Why did this gay couple come from another state? Go to the only place not issuing gay marriage licenses. Bring the media. Then demand Kim Davis denounce her faith. Why couldn't they have just gone somewhere else? Well, the answer is, of course, they are not interested in doing that. They're interested in making it a point to pushing through their liberal agenda. That is what's all about. And quite frankly, this is going to be a very dangerous situation, a very dangerous development, because it's not stopping there. It's not stopping with a county clerk who refuses to grant same-sex marriages licenses because of a religious conviction. Because what about the bakery, which was fined by another maverick Colorado judge, refusing to make a cake for a wedding of a same-sex couple? Now, they could have gone to another bakery, but you see, they wanted to make it a point. Oh, we are being discriminated against. And now you have to persecute and prosecute those who, because of their religious convictions, cannot do that. We have in the great state of California now a most ridiculous liberal law mandating the vaccination of all school kids, except for those who are being homeschooled. A ridiculous law totally violating the religious conviction of those who say, no, we cannot do this. California, one of the few states having done away with religious exemptions. That's, my friends, where it's going. Now, some believe very strongly, based on the Bible, that you should not serve on a jury, following Christ's example, who refused to become an arbitrator in those matters. You see, the law is clear. It's a constitutional right, if you please, that you don't have to serve on the jury if you have religious convictions based on the Bible preventing you from doing so. But more and more magistrates, clerks, and judges are going against that, trying to force you to serve on a jury. And some have buckled and have said, okay, well, it's the law of the land, so we have to do it. Well, what if the law of the land is in opposition to the law of God? You know, there's another very interesting United States Supreme Court decision, which in my judgment is wrong, is unconstitutional, and that is the decision granting a constitutional right to a mother to abort her children. Now, what about a doctor who is conscientiously opposed to conduct such an abortion for any reason? Can he be forced, like this Kentucky clerk was forced, or the judge at least tried to force her, can he be forced to perform abortions? Now, there's a big discussion on that on the internet, and some say, no, it can't be because, a doctor doesn't have to abort. People can go to another doctor. But it's the same argument. These homosexuals could have gone to another clerk, but they chose this one because they wanted to make it a point. So don't you assume ever that we don't see a case pretty soon where a doctor is going to be, quote-unquote, forced to abort, and he says, no, I'm not going to do it. And he might be ending up in court. We see the situation developing in an unbelievable manner. There was a case where a Protestant pastor was placed in contempt, held in contempt, put to jail because he refused to swear. He said, no, the Bible tells me I shouldn't swear. And so he was in jail. And only after, I don't know how long it took, then a law was enacted or a procedure was enacted where people who are religiously objecting to swearing can now affirm instead. But there are still magistrates, and I've been in a courtroom where that was the case, who absolutely are opposed to this concept, and they are threatening you with contempt if you don't swear, if you don't raise your right hand and swear. Immigration officials, even going in front of a postal clerk to renew your passport, will many times insist that you swear, otherwise you are not going to get your wish. What about those who believe that they should take time off to go, let's say, to the Feast of Tabernacles, or to keep the Feast of Trumpets or the Day of Atonement, Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, the way the Jews call it, and Sukkot, insofar as the Feast of Tabernacles is concerned? Again, decisions have made it very clear that you have a constitutional right. But there are employers, including governmental employers, school administrators, they bark at that. And they are trying to pressure you into not upholding that right. And some buckle. See, the bottom line is, my friends, what do you uphold? Even if it was the law of the land, even if there was a constitutional concept that you have to obey, let's say, the law forcing you to abort if you're a doctor, or forcing you to grant marriage licenses, or baking a cake for homosexual couples, and. Still the question is, do you obey the law of the land, or do you obey God? See, there was a case in the Bible where the highest court of the land, the Sanhedrin, commanded the apostles to stop preaching in the name of Jesus Christ. They were even tortured, beaten for doing so. Did they buckle? Did they say, okay, well, now I have to stop doing it then because it's against the law of the land? No way! Not in a million years! They went out and they kept preaching. They were brought back in front of the court. And they said, have we not told you not to do it? Peter said, we have to obey God rather than man. So you will have to make a decision. If you are being confronted with this conflict, whom do you want to obey? Now you have to make sure that your religious conviction is based on the Bible, is based on what God tells you. But if it is, you must obey God rather than man and pay the consequences, even if this means a fine, even if this means jail. I applaud Mrs. Davis, who stood up for her religious conviction. I wish more and more people would do it. Because right now, most people are silent. Most people don't even understand the conflict. If somebody says, oh, she had to obey the law of the land, they don't have any clue as to what we are talking about, and they have no clue as to what God demands in His Word of us. Be aware, religious persecution will continue. Some are conscientiously opposed to fighting in war. Will it come to the point if a draft is being reinstituted? Like one American president once said during World War II, all these conscientious objectors should be placed against the wall and shot. Is it coming to that? Where there's no more religious liberty and freedom, no more religious convictions allowed in a country which was based on the foundation of religious liberty and freedom. Thank you very much for listening. This is Norbert Link for the Standing Watch program.
Standing Watch is a presentation by the Church of the Eternal God, P.O. Box 270519, San Diego, California 92198. More information is also available at our website, eternalgod.org.